This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 139. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Alrighty, this is probably the most exciting time of the year for me. Oh my goodness, twice a year we offer ERP school and it is back. And I am so excited and so thrilled with the feedback so far. So a lot of you already may know that ERP school, which is called Exposure and Response Prevention School, is an online course that I created to help people who don't have access to an ERP therapist or don't have the resources to get an ERP therapist because they can be very expensive, or they've had treatment and they're looking for a little booster or they're looking for a little motivation. That is why I made this course, and I am so excited to share with you again. I think this is like the fifth time I've shared it with you guys, and I offer it in September and February every year. So yay, it's February, and I'm, like I said, so thrilled. The feedback has been incredible. Oh my goodness, to hear you all, saying and posting online how much it's helping you and how you feel validated and how you feel inspired and motivated. And that just fills my heart. So if you're interested in getting ERP school, you can go to cbtschool.com and go to online courses. You can click the link in the show notes of this show, and there will be a link there as well. Or if you Google ERP School OCD, it will come up in the very, very top. So there are some options for you. It will be available for another few days. So it will be available till March 9th, and then we'll go back to living our lives, and then we'll be back in September. So that is there for you. Now, let's get over to the episode. All right. Before we do, I would like to share with you the I Did a Hard Thing segment. And it's sort of the inspiration for today. I feel like there is a really strong theme here today. So let's just get started. So this was submitted by one of the people in Instagram, and they said this: I tolerated an OCD spike while also treating people with OCD as a therapist. And then they say, therapists are human too. Now, the reason I chose this as the I Did a Hard Thing is because this is very much in line with what's happening today in this episode. So let me tell you a little story. Things have been a little crazy in my life. I'm not going to lie. There's, a lot of growth, a lot of challenges, a lot of emotion and grieving and, just all the things. And I was sitting at the office yesterday. I'd seen clients, and I really felt that I hadn't really shared what was going on for me. And I was beginning to feel a little bit like a fraud, like I show up and I'm happy and I'm excited because I am happy and excited. But then inside, a lot's happening for me. So I just sat down to my phone in my office on my couch, and I just typed out where I'm at. And I shared with you all basically where I am in terms of my medical journey. Right? Last year was crazy for me regarding medical stuff and mental health. I feel like the world kind of crumbled down on me, and I crumbled down on it, and it was a big, big storm in my life. And I'm so happy to be on the other end of that. And so in this post, I had shared about what has been treated and what will continue to be watched regarding my medical health. And the feedback was incredible. Oh my goodness, you guys just flooded me with support and love and questions and validation, and it just meant so much to me. But the biggest question I got asked, and the most common question I got asked, which was, how do I deal with health anxiety? How did you manage that? You know, after what I had been through, which I know is not the worst of the worst. There are many people going through much worse than I did. But, you know, I still got tested. I still got challenged. And because a lot of you asked about this, I figured there was no other time than to share with you I did a hard thing, which was basically what I was managing the whole of last year. So I know a lot of you somewhat know this story, but let me sort of get you up to date. So in February, exactly a year ago, I started to have some medical symptoms that were concerning and starting to affect the functioning of my life. And so I went to the doctor, and he was fairly immediately concerned. So then there it begins. So before I move on, for those of you who do have health anxiety, you may want to know ahead of time that we're going to be talking about some difficult things here. So that is there. You can, if you're uncomfortable and you're not ready to go down this road, you can by all means turn this podcast off. However, if you have health anxiety, I would encourage you to use this as an exposure, as a way to sort of stare your fear in the face. So basically what happened is we began, you know, when you go to the doctor, they kind of rule out a bunch of big things so that they can work towards the small things. And he was alarmed and had sent me to immediately get an MRI on my brain and my spine, and actually my lower hip area as well, based on some symptoms I was having. And as you all probably know, but for those of you who are new, they found a lesion on my left cerebellum, which was about the size of like 2 peas mushed together. And this was concerning, number one, because usually things don't show up in that area. And if they do, the symptoms are much different to what I have. And, you know, they were trying to rule out huge things like cancer and tumors and multiple sclerosis and meningitis, like all of these really big things that they immediately had concerns about. So here we have this weird thing in my brain, sort of like a little black hole in my brain, or a black lump or a mass or whatever you would call it. And no one knew what it was. I had tons of doctors look at it. Everyone scratched their head and said, you know, we don't know. And because of that, we had to proceed to check everything. And so basically within the span of, I would say, about 6 months, I had 9 MRIs. I had a spinal tap. I had an EEG, an ECG. I had an upper and lower endoscopy, which also involved a duodenal biopsy. I had 5 days of 3-hour IV infusions. I had a CT scan of every single organ in my body. I had mammogram. I had probably close to 50 blood tests. I don't know. I could go back and look at my records, but a ton. I had neurological testing. I had neuropsychological testing. I had to wear a cardiovascular heart rate monitor for 2 weeks. I had to do a tilt table test. I had to have a cardiovascular stress test. And I had to pee in a plastic tub for approximately 48 hours. That's just to name the ones that were really hard for me. There were some others that went on along the side too, but I didn't want to go on and on and on. But as you can imagine, it was a ton of tests. And with tests come a ton of uncertainty. Now, I'll conclude this really well before I share with you how I managed that, which is, the cool thing is the lesion in my brain, we called it Lionel. Hi, Lionel. He's coming along for the ride. Lionel is just hanging out in my brain. Hasn't got a lot to do right now. We check on him every 3 months with an MRI. I go into this massive MRI machine, which I hate. And I'm in there for but anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a half, depending on how we're going and what they're looking for and blah, blah, blah. It's brutal. Those MRI tests are brutal, and I'm sending love to anybody who has to do such a thing. I really cannot think of much worse than having to do that. But at the same time, I'm so grateful for the opportunity and the privilege to get to do that. So yeah, that's Lionel. We can say hi, Lionel. He hangs out. We meet every 3 months and we move on. The other piece, which has been concluded and is now being treated, is I was diagnosed with something called postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. It's called POTS. It is I did a whole episode, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but it does involve a pretty extensive treatment. Not medical in terms of I don't have to go in and have, regular treatments, but at home I have to do a ton of maintenance to prevent the increase of symptoms. So there's that in and of itself. So I was so, so grateful to get that diagnosis, because up until then, every single doctor was scratching their head. Every doctor was just like, we don't know why you feel this way. And I don't think it's to do with the lesion, but the lesion makes no sense. Why is Lionel there? Everybody was just scratching their head. And so throughout that, I had to sit through a whole ton of emotions: frustration, anger, fear, sadness. The frustration because I was struggling to stay patient was a really hard one too, of, waiting. And then you have to wait for the test. And then you have to wait for the results of the test. And then you have to wait to see the doctor to discuss the results of the test. It was just painful. And, like I said, to get those diagnoses at the last was just like a huge relief, right? Just to be like, okay, at least now we know what we're working with. And so here I am now, feeling like I'm on the other end of this sort of journey now, and sort of working with wrapping my head around what happened last year. But what I want to do for you guys is to share with you the 2 different areas in which I had to really double down with the tools that I am constantly telling you guys to use, right? So I'm going to break this into 2 pieces. So let's talk first about Lionel. Lionel is a mystery to everybody. He just, he's just a very interesting fellow. And because nobody has any real clarity on it, I have had to accept that we might never know. And I had to really increase my response and my relationship with uncertainty. I come on here every day and I tell you guys to accept the uncertainty and embrace the uncertainty and, allow it to be there. But I really hadn't considered what it was like to be uncertain forever, right? Like to have to now live with something that will continue to be uncertain. That was hard for me. And I always have taught and thought about uncertainty as this sort of short-term thing that you feel and it rises and falls. But then this kind of thing happens and I'm like, well, I haven't really had a rise and fall of uncertainty. I just keep waiting. And even when I get good results from the MRI, it is really dropping down into a radical acceptance of uncertainty, right? Now, another huge piece of this is I have to stay present. So as I lead up to the next MRI test, which is actually happening here in the next week or 2 for me, this is when uncertainty gets to be the highest. And this is where my brain wants to scoot forward into the future and ruminate about all of the possibilities. Did Lionel get bigger? Has Lionel spread? Has it moved? What's happening? What will be the outcome? My brain, of course, wants to go there because that's my brain's job, right? My amygdala's job is to, detect danger. So it's doing its job. But I have to take my responsibility, which is to stay very present and not engage in what ifs, right? Not engage in, let me see if I can figure this out in my head, or let me play it out. Or I wonder if I think about it, it'll be less scary in terms of like, I just want the fear to go away. And so staying present is exactly that. It's, okay, I'm anxious, I feel uncertain, I'm going to get down on the carpet and I'm going to play with my kids and I'm going to direct my attention to the Uno cards or the, Legos. I'm offering my attention to the present, right? I'm not being in the present while thinking about the future. And I'm not being with my children and playing with them while ruminating on the past. I'm radically, looking at the colors of the Legos. What do the Legos feel like? What does the delight look like on my son's face? What does the clinking of the Legos sound like? What do the cards feel like in my hands? I'm dropping down out of my mind into what is really here, which is, ultimately smells and sights and feelings. And that's really what's happening. The present is literally that simple. And so it's really getting down on the ground and dropping down into that. So that's a huge piece of the work for me with Lionel. Now, the other piece, which has been hard, is, and this is my advice to you all, if you're dealing with health anxiety, because to be honest, people who have health anxiety are often usually having a symptom that's making them really anxious. Whether it's from anxiety or an actual health problem, it doesn't matter, but that symptom is difficult, right? Pain in the chest, tightness in your ribs, headache, whatever it may be. These symptoms are painful. And so a huge piece of this work when we're dealing with health anxiety is to give yourself permission to feel whatever you feel. If you feel fear, let yourself feel fear. If you feel sad, let yourself feel sad. If you're angry and frustrated because this is really hard, let yourself feel angry and frustrated, right? We're not going to indulge any of these emotions though, right? We're not going to indulge fear by engaging with, all the what ifs and all of those things. And we're not going to engage sadness by, not going to your friend's birthday party and just laying on the ground. If you need to do that, that's fine. But, I think the thing here is to watch, are you indulging it ultimately? Anger, frustration. Okay, I'm feeling them. I'm going to let them flow through my body. I'm not going to use them to lash out though, right? Because then I'm indulging that. And then I'm sort of entertaining the anger by engaging with it too much, right? So feel whatever you're feeling. Give yourself radical permission to feel, right? This is scary stuff, right? Sitting in a wait room of a doctor's office is not fun, right? Our brain naturally goes to crazy places, right? Now, another point, which has been crucial for me, is to seek support. Have a friend who you can call and be like, this sucks. And they say, yes, it sucks. And if you don't have a friend like that, do it for yourself. Validate yourself. This is sucky. I do not like this. This is hard for me. I'm so sorry that I'm going through that. Support yourself, right? Because you deserve it. This is really hard, right? Whether it's fear or an actual physical symptom of, health It doesn't matter, right? Now, the piece here is that I want to differentiate, because I know I told you there's two pieces here, is Lionel really, for me, represents fear. Lionel brings fear. Lionel makes me have to manage fear. This is where I walk the walk. I don't just talk the talk, right? Lionel, to me, is a representation of fear. However, let's go over to the second piece here. My POTS diagnosis, in my mind, is a representation of depression. It's a lifelong syndrome. I know I've had it my whole life, and I know I'm going to have it for the rest of my life. And that can be depressing, right? So, I don't have a lot of fear around my POTS because I know what it is. I know what I have to do. I know what it looks like. So fear actually doesn't show up a ton with POTS, but depression does. Sadness does, right? And so what I really have to do here, again, similar to with Lionel, is to stay very present, right? To stay, not to go back, because the truth is, like I said to you at the beginning, I'm having to somewhat grieve last year right now. I'm really sad about how hard that was. And now that I feel like my feet are on the ground again, I look back and I feel really sad for myself. I feel really sorry for myself that I had to go through that. And I'm not in a woe is me way, in a real honoring, validating way of just going, yeah, that was really hard, Kimberly. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, right? So I have to stay, ultimately really present and allow those feelings to come up, a ton of sadness, right? A ton of, some grief, right? The other piece here is I have to take care of my body now really, really well. I can't ignore it, right? And I encourage you guys, whether you have health anxiety or not, really be careful around, not adding to the stress, right? Because health anxiety is definitely a thing. So, make sure you get your exercise. Don't spend a ton of time researching Google and medical websites. In fact, what I would tell you is do not spend any time Googling symptoms. Google is not a doctor, and it's not going to give you doctors' opinions and professional advice that are helpful for you. So this is like a dead firm rule I have for myself and for my clients is there is no Googling. If you have a question, you wait and you go see your doctor. And if something is imminent, okay, you can go to your doctor. But, do not rely on Google for medical help, right? It's like a number one rule. But take care of your body. In addition to that, it means don't avoid taking care of your body, right? Give it what it needs. Take care of it. Be gentle with it, right? Self-care. It's a huge piece of it, right? Now, again, as I mentioned, I have had to grieve some things, right? And I think the thing that was the most shocking to me is I went through this grief process for the past. Now, this is where it's interesting. And you guys, even if you don't have a health issue, you may resonate with this. I have been telling my husband and my family for my entire life how tired I am. And everyone has this automatic response, which is you need to work less, right? And I've always said to them, yes, I know, but it doesn't feel like that kind of tired. I am exhausted all the time. And I've told doctors this, and they've, kind of said, well, you're in grad school, or you're working hard, or you have children, or, you have anxiety. Like they kind of brushed it off. And now, now that I have that diagnosis, of course, all those things were true too. I don't want to discount that. But now that I have this diagnosis, I'm like, wow, I have been going through this for the majority of my life, definitely the entire part of my adult life. And so I kind of have to grieve that, right? Like, wow, I felt bad for quite a long time. And I kind of was taught and allowed myself to just brush it under the rug. And again, at the time, that was appropriate. To be honest with you, POTS is a very misunderstood disorder. So, no one probably would have been able to help me anyway, right? So as you can hear, we've got these two opposing pieces. Number one, Lionel, huge amount of anxiety, uncertainty, and doubt. Then we have POTS, a huge amount of grief, sadness, self-care, accountability on those ones. But here I am now. So that's the last year. But the thing I really want to share with you is here I am now, basically having to manage and then work on anticipatory anxiety, right? So as I said, in a few weeks, I'll have another MRI. What do I do with myself until then, right? And now I'll tell you what I tell my clients. I'm going to do absolutely nothing. Until that test, I am not to Google. I am not to seek reassurance. I'm not to avoid my anxiety. I am not to mentally try and figure out what will happen because it will not work, right? I am not to avoid conversations about MRIs and brain things and, all of the medical jargon. I'm not to avoid any of that either, right? My job until I'm inside that MRI machine is to do absolutely nothing. Live my life, right? Do the best I can. Be gentle with myself while I feel anxious and while I have uncertainty and while I feel sad about all of this, right? Frustrated about all of this, right? That is the work. The compulsive behavior that is so easy to fall into is an attempt to not feel those feelings, right? To take the uncertainty away, to take the anxiety away. But this is what I say to myself and I say to my clients. That will not change the outcome. Nothing will. I'm out of control here. I have to allow myself to accept that. So me doing a compulsion, me doing these kind of anxiety blocking behaviors is a game that I won't win. And it's a game you won't win, right? It's a false sense of security. It's a false experience. The truth is I'm anxious and the truth is you're anxious and that's okay, right? And that's how it has to be. There is no magic pill for this. No amount of, I have family members who've had breast cancer, and every year when they have their checkup, they're never going to habituate to that. It's scary stuff, right? And I don't expect a lot of you to habituate because that's not the goal. The goal here is to hold space for your fear without reacting to it, right? And staying very present with what's happening and aware of what's happening, right? Now, you can do that with sadness and you can do that with fear. You may flip-flop between the two because that's probably the case if you have a health condition or you're afraid of having a health condition, right? Now, the last thing I'm going to say here is the biggest piece of work I had to do last year was accepting the final outcome, right? A lot of people ask me, friends, like, are you really afraid something bad's going to happen? Or they'll say to me, is something bad going to happen? Do I need to be concerned here? And we circled around the word death. Nobody said the word death, but everyone was thinking it. At that point I was on my back having a really difficult time. And again, I'm fine and I always was, but it's funny how we circle and tippy-toe around death. For me, I really, really soon, basically as soon as the doctors were like, oh, we have to look at this could be serious, I kind of immediately moved into all right, bad things could happen here. I'm going to dip down, drop into the final outcome the possible final outcome. And I'm actually going to marinate in that a little, right? Like, yeah, this could be really, really serious. This could be the end, which is so scary for so many people. And it was for me too. But the reason I'm addressing this is that's what most people with health anxiety are afraid of. And this is ultimately around allowing thoughts about death, right? And that's what I did. I, 4 months, had thoughts about death. I had fear about death. I had sensations that, were related to my fear around dying. And I had to accept every single one of them while also being an observer to the fact that I wasn't dying in that moment. I was having thoughts about dying. I was having sensations about dying. I was having a fear, right? And so that separation, that diffusion from that experience and stepping back and going, wait a second, right in this moment, I'm not dying. No one's even said dying, but I'm going to be an observer and validate and honor that thought as it shows up. Make space for it, right? We are not going to tippy-toe around it, because if we do, fear will show up and it will raise its head and it will, beat us down, right? So similar to the exposures you may be doing or that you could do, it was me going, I'm going to stare my fear in the face, right? Whether it's going to happen or not, that's where everyone's mind was going, and that's where my mind was going, and that's what I'm going to do, because that's what I need to do, because fear doesn't get to run this show, right? So they're the main points, right? We look at the fear, we look at the sadness, and then we stare the outcome right in the face, right? Not easy, not fun, but totally doable, right? So what I'm going to say to you is take what you can from this. I am not perfect. I am not going to say that you need to follow this perfectly, because I didn't do it perfectly. But in hindsight, I can now look back and see what did work and see what didn't work. And I'll be gentle with myself with that, right? So there it is. That is how I handle health anxiety. This is how you might want to handle health anxiety, because it works, right? That's all I have to say. I'm sending you my love. This is a great example of what exposure and response prevention looks like, and a ton of mindfulness, right? So I hope that's helpful. And if it scared you, I hope that you're allowing that fear to be there, right? Because that's the work. That's it. That's how this goes. So I'm sending you my love. I cannot wait to see you next week. I want you to know one more time that ERP School will be closing. The cart will close for that on March 9th. So if you haven't purchased ERP School yet and you're interested in doing so, please do go on to cbtschool.com to sign up. There is a module on health anxiety. And so I would just love to have you be there and learn, right? Have a wonderful day. It is a beautiful day to do hard things. Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.